There is a version of that night I still tell myself when I need to sleep. In it, I was a wife who loved her husband and said the wrong words at the wrong moment. But I know what I actually did. I stood up in a room of 30 people who trusted me, and I let 3 years of choices walk through my mouth in 4 seconds of audio I thought I had deleted. That was the night the room stopped being Daniel's birthday party and started being my verdict. And the worst part is that I was the one who called it to order. My name is Claire, and I am 34 years old, and I have been a marketing consultant long enough to know that my most useful skill is not strategy or copy. It is the ability to make any room believe I am exactly what it needs. I am good at this, and I have always understood it as a form of protection. My husband Daniel is 37. He builds things carefully. For the first 4 years, he left a handwritten note under my coffee cup every morning. Nothing important, just a sentence or a bad joke, sometimes just my name, with a small drawing beside it. I kept everyone in the drawer of my nightstand without telling him. Every Friday we picked the worst reviewed film we could find and scored it on a rubric we invented together, 10 categories, argued with genuine conviction. We disagreed loudly, and it was my favourite part of the week. Lately, I read the rubric from a note in my phone, and the argument lasts 2 minutes and then stops. One morning I make coffee on autopilot and lift the cup and check underneath it. The habit is 4 years old. There is nothing there. There has been nothing there for 3 years, and I knew this before I checked. At dinner that evening, Daniel asks what has changed between us recently. He uses the word recently carefully, as if he has a timeline in mind. He says he wants to understand what I am carrying that I have not told him. He mentions the coffee, still almond milk and 1 sugar every morning without being reminded, as evidence that he is paying attention, and he asks me to be honest because the home works on honesty, and without it nothing else works either. I say I am just tired from the Carlisle campaign. An hour later, he stops me in the doorway of the study and says he has noticed my phone face down on the table more evenings than before, and he is not accusing anything, but he wants me to know he is watching, and that if the tiredness is about something more than the campaign, he needs to hear it now, before the distance becomes something they have to cross rather than close. He points to the phone on the end table as he says it. I tell him I appreciate that. I go to bed first and text Marcus from under the covers with the lamp off. The silver photo frame on the mantel catches the morning light and throws it across the ceiling, and I watch it move for a moment before I make coffee. I need to order Daniel's birthday cake this week. Caramel. His usual. The first time I understood what Marcus was actually offering me, I was walking between client meetings on a Tuesday in March when he called. He asked how the Carlisle campaign presentation had gone, the one I had mentioned once 6 weeks before, at a dinner where the conversation had mostly been about Daniel's quarterly projections. I stopped walking. I told Marcus how it went, the room, the client's reaction, the moment the strategy clicked. He asked a specific follow-up question about the competitive framing. I said thank you before I hung up and stood on the sidewalk afterward, not quite sure why I had said it. Daniel had not asked about my work in those same 6 weeks. I told myself I was not measuring. I was, though, in the way you measure without a ruler, by the shape of the space rather than the number. 2 weeks after that call, I was in the kitchen of Marcus and Sasha's apartment, 1 floor above ours in the building complex, making tea while Sasha was at her mother's on the coast. The radio was on. The mugs were ones I had never used before. It was an ordinary afternoon in a borrowed kitchen, and for the first time in months, I was entirely myself, without having to engineer it for anyone. And I did not think carefully about what that meant. Daniel came home 3 days early from the northern offices. He texted while I was still in my car, 2 blocks from Marcus's building, asking when I would be back because he hadn't eaten. I told him I had been at dinner with Priya, who was navigating something hard with her partner. I gave him the restaurant name, what Priya ordered, the specific thing she had said that I thought was brave. I called Priya in the morning and said I had told Daniel they had been spending evenings together and she needed to know in case it came up. She said okay in a flat, careful voice, that I did not register as flat. At dinner 4 days after Daniel's return, he sat across from me and made his case for the state of us. He said they had not fought, the bills were current, I seemed content at events. He named the coffee, still almond milk and 1 sugar, every morning without a reminder, as one of many signs that he was paying attention. Then he asked, directly and without pressure, whether I felt seen by him, and if not, what he was missing. He said he was asking because he wanted to close the gap while it was still small. He said he needed me to be straight with him because the alternative, him noticing things and not asking, was something he refused to accept. I said things were fine. He looked relieved, and I excused myself to use the bathroom and recorded a voice note from behind the locked door. Into the voice note I said I was so tired of being invisible inside my own marriage. I said it like a fact. I sent it to Marcus. I washed my hands and went back to the table. Priya left the gym at 20 minutes to 7 the following week and saw me getting into Marcus's car in the parking lot. She stood at her own car door for a full minute. 3 days later, when I called in the morning and told her what I needed her to confirm if anyone asked, she understood she had not misread the parking lot. She said okay a second time. There is a version of Priya I know well, loyal, quietly drawn to risk she is too careful to take herself. And she covered for both those reasons, the one she would name and the one she wouldn't. I did not examine either. That same week, Daniel came to me on the couch in the evening and said he had noticed I was out more than before and wanted to check in. He referenced the Priya explanation, but said he wanted to hear it from me directly. He pointed to the phone on the cushion beside me, specifically the way it had been face down most evenings I was home, and said it was a small detail, but a different one from what he had been used to. And if something had changed, he needed to hear it from me now, because the home ran on honesty, and the alternative, discovering things later, would change what he was able to offer her in return. I told him I was tired and sometimes needed to decompress, and he was reading into a screen habit. He said okay, went to make tea, and I watched him and changed nothing. I am at the bakery across from our building ordering Daniel's birthday cake when Sasha comes in behind me. I am halfway through a message to Marcus, and the message makes me smile the real way, and I look up to give my phone number and she is standing at the counter. We say hello. She orders a croissant. We leave at the same time and walk in different directions. That evening Marcus does not mention running into Sasha, and neither do I, and the unmentioned thing sits between us like a third item nobody is going to claim. I planned every part of that birthday party. The flowers at the Copper Terrace private dining room, the seating chart that took 40 minutes because certain people could not be adjacent to others, and the playlist which I ran through the venue's ambient speaker dock by connecting my phone at the entrance. 30 guests. I arrived an hour early and moved each centerpiece 2 inches to the left and felt the specific satisfaction of a room that was mine because I had made it. Marcus and Sasha arrived on time. Sasha said the room looked beautiful. Marcus said incredible. They were warm the way they were always warm in rooms with other people, and across the entire evening, Marcus's knee did not find mine under the table, and he spoke to Daniel's colleagues with the same easy interest he brought to everyone. I noted this and put it somewhere I did not open during the party. The toast was 40 minutes in. I stood at the head of the table with the silver card in my hand. I had written Daniel's name in it 14 times. I know this because I counted afterward. And the first 2 minutes were good in the specific way I am good at this. Funny, detailed, calibrated to the room. People laughed. Daniel looked at me with an expression I had once been able to read clearly. In the emotional section of the toast, I mentioned the wedding photo on our mantel at home, the one from 7 years ago. Me laughing at something out of frame, him watching me laugh. And I said that picture was why I knew the life we had built was real. I said it as evidence. Then I moved to the next prepared section, and something tangled, because Marcus was across the table and the names were adjacent in my head, and I said the wrong one, just the beginning. 1 syllable, clipped and recovered in under a second. 30 people were listening. The clip was audible. I covered it. I laughed and said the wine and said Daniel knew I had been living in my own head lately. I finished the prepared section and it landed almost as well as it would have without the stumble. Then I raised my glass and reached for my phone to advance the playlist and hit the wrong file. For one full second, I did not know it was playing. I was still facing the room, glass raised, and then I heard my own voice through the ambient speaker at dinner party volume. 4 seconds of the bathroom voice note, the one where I said I was so tired of being invisible inside my own marriage. I hit stop. It took twice before it worked. The silence after was not a comfortable silence. I activated everything available. I said my phone was haunted, said this was what happened when you gave a chronic overthinker control of the playlist, said poor Daniel, who married a woman who narrated her anxieties into voice memos. 6 or 7 people laughed and the room's temperature fell by 1 degree instead of 10. I did not sit down. I finished the toast standing. For the following 11 minutes, I was the most charming person in the room. The room became polite. It did not recover. Joanna was 2 chairs from Daniel, and she saw the 2-second window, the moment between the voice note and the recovery when my face was simply the face of someone falling. She watched me close it. She watched me perform through the next 40 minutes, and her expression was the expression of someone who did not need to add anything to a file she had already organized. Daniel took the glass from my hand gently, just before I finished the toast, and set it on the table and thanked everyone for being there in the voice he used when he was closing something. Then he moved to the other side of the room. He spoke to his parents, his colleagues, his oldest friends. He did not return to my side for the rest of the evening. During a quiet moment near the dessert service, he came to where I was standing and asked, in a low voice, what I had intended the voice note to communicate. He used the word intended deliberately. He said he was asking because he needed to understand whether what the room had just heard was something I had been feeling for a long time or something born from the stress of the event. And the answer would determine what conversation they needed to have when they got home. He was not raising his voice. He referenced the phone, specifically that I was the one who had connected it to the venue's speaker system, and said the fact that it was there at all, ready to play, meant it had been on her device for a reason. I said the note was anxiety narration, and the phone was an accident. In the Uber home, he came back to it differently. He said he understood the evening had been stressful, and he was not trying to make it worse, but he needed to know whether the Priya story had been accurate, because something in the timing had not tracked for him, and he was tired of working around a gap he could not name. He said the marriage could survive hard conversations, but it could not survive sustained silence, and if she was choosing silence, he needed to know because it would change what he did next. He pointed out specifically that the voice note said, invisible, not overwhelmed, not tired, and he wanted her to tell him what she was invisible to. I said the Priya story was accurate. He looked out the window for the rest of the ride. Joanna was the last guest to leave. She collected her coat, walked past me at the exit, stopped, and said quietly that she hoped I was making good choices. She did not elaborate. She walked out. In the Uber, my phone showed a message from Priya that said only, "Call me when you're safe." I did not call. I told myself the recovery had gone well, and I could work with the rest. Sunday dinner at Daniel's parents' was polite in a way that constituted its own form of statement. His mother said my name at regular intervals and moved on quickly each time. Joanna arrived with her partner and helped carry dishes to the table and did not look at me for longer than logistics required. Halfway through the pasta course, Joanna said something to the table in the tone she used for observations that were not up for discussion, that she had read once about how people who felt unseen sometimes sought proof of their worth in places that cost more than they understood, and the search tended to be more expensive than the original problem. The table went quiet for 2 seconds too long. I smiled and said Joanna had always been the philosophical one and reached for the wine. Joanna picked up her fork. The comment stayed in the center of the table like something no one was going to clear. 2 nights before that dinner, at 12:30 in the morning, I woke to find the other side of the bed empty. I checked the kitchen and the study. Then I went to the living room window. Through the fire stairs glass door, I could see the rooftop terrace 2 floors above. Daniel was sitting in one of the outdoor chairs with his hands on his knees. No phone, no book, just sitting and looking at the city below and doing nothing else. I watched him for a few seconds and went back to bed and told myself he was processing the party in his composed, meditative way. He came back at 2:15. I was close enough to sleep that I did not speak. In the days following the Sunday dinner, Daniel asked me 2 things. He came to me in the living room the following evening and asked what I wanted from the marriage, not as an accusation, but as a genuine question, phrased as, if I could describe the life I needed, was this the life I was describing, and was the marriage currently the thing she had in mind when she thought about what she wanted? He said he had been thinking about the rooftop, specifically about what he had understood sitting there, and he wanted to understand it better in conversation with her rather than alone. He said he was asking because the answer might still be one they could work toward together. I told him I wanted to feel like a specific person to him rather than a well-maintained circumstance. He said he heard that and asked what that looked like in practice. I did not answer because I did not have a language for it that did not open other things. 2 days later, he said that he needed the home to be honest ground, and that if it wasn't, he would need to make different arrangements, by which he meant how they occupied the space together day to day. He said it without threatening. He said it the way you state a condition and then left for his office and came home at normal time and made dinner and said nothing more. 3 days after the Sunday dinner, I sat across from him with my voice level and my eye contact maintained and gave him the surface of accountability. I said I was sorry the toast had gone the way it did. I said the phone was an accident I should have prevented, and I understood how awful it had been. I offered the couple's retreat Priya had once recommended, 4 hours from the city, solid reviews, as evidence of my commitment. He said he needed to think about it, and I understood this as the door staying open, and went to make tea. I was wrong about what he meant by needing to think about something. Priya called 2 days later, sounding careful and deliberate. She said Sasha had sent her a message asking whether she had noticed anything unusual at the birthday party, and how long she had known both of us. Priya had told Sasha she didn't know anything specific. Then she called me. She said, "Something is moving." I called Marcus immediately after. His voice was warm at the surface, and underneath it was something measured and still, the sound of a person who has already reorganized his priorities without announcing it. He said not to worry. I stayed on the call for 10 minutes, and when I put the phone down, I could not name exactly what had been wrong with the reassurance, only that it had not reassured me. On Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen when I could see, at an angle through the window, the ramp into the building's underground parking. Daniel was loading a box of files into the trunk of his car, working from a handwritten list, moving through it methodically, checking each item before moving to the next. I told myself this was the filing backlog he had been meaning to clear for a year. I turned back to the stove. That afternoon, Joanna arrived to take him for a drive. She opened the trunk to put her coat in, saw the box, and closed the trunk carefully without saying anything to me. They drove away. I tidied the kitchen. That evening, the silver photo frame on the mantel was centered as always, but there was a thin line of dust on the shelf, just to the left of where it sat, the ghost shape of where it had been before someone moved it and set it back. I pushed it gently to the right and did not follow the thought anywhere useful. The following week, I was at the pharmacy on 14th Street when I turned into the supplements aisle, and Sasha was there reading a label. We occupied the same aisle for 2 full minutes before she looked up and said hello. Her voice was the voice of a gauge reading, neither warm nor cold, simply accurate. She asked how Daniel was doing. I said he was wonderful. She said that was so good to hear and she would tell Marcus, and she paid at the next register and left first. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes without starting the engine, searching for the specific thing in that conversation that had settled somewhere behind my ribs. I could not name it, and that was the part that stayed with me all the way home. On a Wednesday evening, Daniel came home and stood in the living room doorway with his jacket still on and told me he had scheduled an appointment with a family attorney. He called it gathering information. He used the voice of a calendar notification. Informational, requiring no response. He went to hang up his jacket. I called Priya that night. I told her what I needed, not asked. That if anyone asked, she should affirm the phrases I used. Emotionally unavailable. A marriage that had stopped functioning in any real sense. Something I had been enduring privately for years. She said okay in the same flat, careful register she had been using for weeks, and I moved on in the same breath. Over the following week, I had variations of the same conversation with 3 people in our shared social circle. Calm, precise, framed as something I had carried privately and was finally able to speak about honestly. At the office, 2 colleagues heard part of the conversation from nearby desks. Priya was present for one of these exchanges, and while I was speaking, I watched something change in her face. A flatness, the look of a decision being made quietly behind her eyes. I did not stop. I called Marcus that evening and asked him to back my version of events if it became necessary. There was a pause before he said yes. It was brief, and he covered it smoothly, but I heard it. And I filed it alongside the measured voice on the phone the week before, and did not look directly at either. Daniel came home on a Thursday and said his colleague, a man he had known for 9 years, had called him at 4:15 that afternoon to ask if he was all right, because he had heard things from me about the marriage that concerned him. Daniel had the time on his screen, 4:15, and he had the exact phrase his colleague had used, checked out. He brought both into the living room. He asked what year I believed he had checked out, and what I had done, at the point I identified it, to address it before that specific week. He said he had not expected welfare checks from his colleagues based on information he had no part in shaping. He referenced the phone call, not the voice note from the party, but the Thursday afternoon conversation with his colleague, as the moment the private became public in a direction he had not chosen, and said if I continued constructing a narrative that reached people before he did, he would need to respond to it through documentation. His voice was level throughout. Then he made the offer. He said he was still willing to sit with a mediator together, one session, before anything became irreversible. He said he was making the offer once. I told him that his need to control the version of events was exactly the behavior I had been describing to people, and the documentation language proved my point in real time. I said the marriage's failure was not one-sided, and his discomfort came from other people now being able to see it. I said his consistent response to emotional difficulty was to organize rather than to feel, and that was a real problem I had been living inside for years, and he was demonstrating it at that exact moment. Most of what I said was built on something true. The distance had been real. His tendency to manage rather than feel had been real. And I deployed the true part at full force to end the conversation. And it worked. He stopped speaking. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read. Then he said he would handle things properly, in the same informational register as the attorney announcement, and he went to the spare bedroom and the door closed. I stood in the living room and told myself I had won the conversation. I went to the kitchen and drank water standing at the sink. I locked myself in the bathroom and called Marcus from the edge of the tub, voice low, and told him what had happened. He listened and then said he thought I should get a lawyer too, and he said it the way a person says something while pointing themselves toward the exit. Practical, calibrated to his own situation, rather than mine. I said goodnight. I sat on the tub's edge with the phone in both hands. It was the first time I understood, without yet having a word for it, that Marcus had always been on the side of Marcus. He was running the same calculation I was, and he was simply further along in it. On Friday morning, I walked to the kitchen and found a different set of keys on the counter, not mine. On the table was a small white card printed with the name and address of the Courthouse Annex Mediation Office, downtown, and an appointment time the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. No note, no explanation. The card, the keys, and the ghost of caramel from the birthday cake weeks ago still somehow present in the air. I stood in my socks and read the card twice. The mediation suite had neutral chairs, a table with water and a yellow legal pad at each position, and a mediator who stated her name and credential before opening the session. Daniel was already seated. His attorney sat to his left. A folder was on the table. I sat beside my own attorney. The mediator stated that a formal divorce petition had been filed with the family court. She read the petition number. She read the filing date. The filing date was 6 days after the birthday party. The temporary orders, primary residential rights for the apartment granted to Daniel as original leaseholder of record. My access limited to scheduled retrieval with 48 hours notice. The joint savings account frozen pending full financial disclosure from both parties. Account history from the shared phone plan requested, covering 38 months by specified start and end dates. The supporting evidence package contained 3 items. First, phone plan records showing contact between my number and Marcus's at a frequency and duration inconsistent with casual social contact across 38 months. Second, the building's key code access log, which on 3 specific dates, each confirmed by Daniel's flight and hotel records, showed entry and exit times with no corresponding registered visitor in the building's guest management system. Third, an audio file retrieved from the Copper Terrace's ambient event documentation system, active from the moment I connected my phone to the speaker dock, timestamped, obtained through a standard records request. 4 seconds of my voice, all 3 items gathered before the birthday party. The audio confirmed what the first 2 had already established. I told the mediator the voice note was out of context and the access log had alternative explanations. She said those arguments belonged to the appropriate procedural stage and continued reading the orders. 3 days later, Priya declined to provide a supporting statement. Her message said she had been there, had watched it happen, had covered when asked, and could not write a version she knew was not what she saw. It was the last message she sent me. Marcus sent 43 words 2 days after the mediation, that he and Sasha were working on things together and needed to focus there. I read it once. I did not respond because there was nothing to respond to. He had described himself correctly, and I had known the description before I read it. In a coffee shop near the mediation office the following week, I sat with an untouched cup and understood what I had spent 3 years trying to get. I had needed someone to choose me actively, specifically, above others, to confirm that I was worth more than being the assumed constant in another person's plan. Marcus said my name like it was interesting, remembered the Carlisle campaign, and returned to his wife in 43 words. He needed me the way people need something that costs them nothing to put down. Daniel, who made the coffee right without announcement, left notes for 4 years, sat on a rooftop at midnight grieving a marriage without calling anyone, was in a photograph on a hiking trail, looking like a man doing something simple and meaning it completely. I had not made him replaceable. I had proved that I was. The silver photo frame was in the furnished rental's bedroom, leaning against the wall in its moving box, still wrapped in the paper I had packed it in. I walked past it every morning on the way to the kitchen. I had not decided what to do with it. Closure snapshot. 6 weeks later, the first hearing proceeded without the parties present, and the temporary orders held. I was in the furnished rental on the 3rd floor of a building whose elevator had a smell I still could not name. The Halliday retainer did not resume. 2 of the 11 guests who had gone quiet sent brief, careful messages. Not the old warmth, just acknowledgement that I existed. Marcus and Sasha posted a photo from a weekend trip. Priya did not write again, and I did not write to her. I drafted a message to Renata 3 separate times and deleted it 3 times, because the only thing she would say was that she understood. and her understanding was the thing I could least afford. The photo frame stayed in the box,